Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today we're looking at the 1987 to 1988 story arc, Iron Man Armor Wars. Tony Stark first appeared, somewhat ironically, in the more fantasy and horror-focused Tales of Suspense. In his first feature, he would be shown as a technical advisor for the American Army as it fought in Vietnam, and after setting off a tripwire, shrapnel would be embedded into his chest, threatening his life. Tony would be captured by the enemy due to this, and they attempted to force him to build weapons for them with what little life he had left. Instead, he built a suit of armor, this giant gray clunky robot cosplay, that worked to keep him alive while also letting him fight off dangerous threats. Tony's suit would almost immediately get painted gold in an effort to make him less frightening to those he wished to save, and to make things easier for the colorist and breakdowns. And not long after that, the legendary Steve Ditko himself would add the red flourishes that would finally give us that truly iconic Iron Man look. But Tony's personality maybe left something to be desired, as the hero struggled with relevance until writer David Michelinie and artist Bob Layton did something fairly unprecedented in comics at that point. They gave Tony an alcohol addiction. Tony's struggle with alcoholism would greatly affect the next decade of his stories, and really continue influencing them beyond even that. It would see him give up being Iron Man for a time, letting his pilot and friend, James Rhodes, take over as the hero, and would eventually allow rival Obadiah Stane to nearly completely take over Tony's company, Stark International, and give Stane access to Iron Man schematics that would allow him to build his own suit and become the Ironmonger. Tony would eventually manage to overcome his alcoholism, and then would make himself a brand new red and silver suit, working alongside Rhodey temporarily before an accident while attempting to re-enter Earth's atmosphere left Rhodey in the hospital with some third-degree burns and some performance fright that prompted him to give the role of Iron Man back to Tony full-time. In an effort to rebuild his life, Stark would move out to the West Coast and start a new company, Stark Enterprises, but his problems were far from over. Advanced idea mechanics would destroy the Justice League-style satellite he was building, his old friend Clytemnestra would betray him, and an old enemy, Justin Hammer, would return to continue bringing trouble into Tony's life. Hammer helped create a number of armored-up supervillains, and one of them, called Force, would decide he's had enough taking orders from Hammer and defect, choosing to work with Tony and Iron Man instead of Hammer. This would lead Tony to a discovery that blew apart everything he thought he was doing and achieving as a superhero. A discovery that becomes the main focus for the Armor Wars as Michelinie and Layton return to the character they'd already helped define. So let's find out what it is that he discovers and take this away. The comic opens on the invincible Iron Man, running away from some missiles. But it's okay, this is actually just a demonstration, a part of preparing for some sort of charity event for an army base. I don't really understand why the army needs to hold charity anything, though. They're the most funded thing in the history of the world. Maybe they can just use some of that millions of dollars they're never able to count for during their audits. Just a thought. With the demonstration done, Tony takes some personal time to look at Force's armor, that he got from the now ex-villain right before the start of this series, as I mentioned. Also, if you're wondering what's up with the Lionel Richie hair, Tony was talked into getting a perm while attempting to talk up a hairstylist named Ray LaCosta, who's not actually important, but I think she was supposed to be. Also, it was probably mostly an attempt by Michelinie and Layton to give Tony what they thought of as a more modern look. Couldn't have him coasting on those Clark Gable looks forever, you know? Tony finds something in Force's armor that he doesn't like, to the point that he starts tearing his lab apart until Rhodey is forced to intervene just to get him to stop. What Tony found was that Force's armor uses some proprietary Iron Man technology. Tech that Tony kept so secret that he hadn't even risked patenting it. This convinces Tony that his lab must have been bugged, though he was unable to find evidence of such while tearing his lab apart. But however the info was stolen, he realizes that this means that any number of tech-based villains out there might actually be using his designs, which means that their power is his responsibility. In other words, any evil that these villains have done and continue to do is on his hands, since it was his technology that made their power suits possible. Of course, Tony doesn't know this for sure, so he checks with Force to confirm that, in fact, the most powerful components of his Force armor came from Justin Hammer, that old Iron Man villain and business competitor of Tony Stark as owner of Hammer Industries and its West Coast branch, Transcorp. Tony is so distracted by this that he accidentally overreacts during the military charity event later, destroying 2 expensive new tanks even though the plan had been for the military to showcase the tank's power. But oh no, however will the military afford new tanks? The reality continues to haunt him, keeping him up at night, and he even calls Force in the middle of the night to ask how many people died because of the villain, something Force doesn't really want to think about either. His obsession leads him to going to Scott Lang, the second Ant-Man, and a character that just also happens to be created by Michelini. What are the odds? To get his assistance in breaking into Transcorp's computer systems. Stark also enlists the aid of Abe Zimmer, a computer genius working for Stark Enterprises who was initially shown as a crazy old man afraid of an industrial espionage agent called Ghost. Tony and Iron Man had proven Ghost to be real, saving Zimmer's job, and now the old man feels he owes Tony Stark. With Scott as Ant-Man physically accessing Transcorp's network and Zimmer remotely accessing it, they managed together to obtain a list of everyone Hammer sold the Iron Man tech to. Or almost everyone. The list will turn out to be a little incomplete after their transmission was cut short, but it'll be enough to get things started. As it turns out, Hammer had hired the villain Spy Master to break into Tony Stark's personal lab a long time ago and steal the Iron Man tech, something Spy Master can't confirm himself, having died only a few issues before this while trying to kill Tony Stark, and ended up being killed by that Ghost guy instead. Tony attempts to pursue legal means to get his tech back, but his army of lawyers come up short-handed, primarily since Stark can't prove the tech is his, since he never patented it. So unable to bear the thought of his creation being used by villains any longer, he takes matters into his own hands. He confronts an old Daredevil villain named Stilt Man, yes, that's a real Marvel supervillain, and uses what he calls a negator pack on the armored villain, which destroys any Stark proprietary technology inside the villain's suit, leaving Stiltman incapacitated. He then confronts a villain named Mauler, whose suit had been created by another competitor of Stark's named Edwin Cord, who had also created a group called the Raiders that will show up in just a moment. Mauler isn't interested in a fight and simply gives his suit up to Iron Man, leading us next to the Controller. The Controller had at this point been building himself a cult in California, using his control discs that let him take over people's minds. But after a short fight, Iron Man attaches one of his negator packs to the Controller, and his brief reign as the new Charlie Manson comes to an end. These actions aren't without their consequences. Stiltman attempts to sue Iron Man for excessive use of force, and the cult attempts to sue him for infringing on their religious freedom. Iron Man's brash attitude is also scaring away investors and creating a public relations nightmare for the new Stark Enterprises. But Stark is far from done. Edwin Cord's Raiders attempt to raid a US Air Force cargo plane, only for Iron Man to interrupt their attempt and slap them all with more negator packs. Tony then attempts to skip to the end of the list, the incomplete part, believing that a character named Stingray might have been the final name on the list. But Stingray is a more heroic character than Tony has been dealing with so far, and on top of that, Stingray is currently working for the US military. Stingray leads Iron Man underwater for their fight, where Stingray has the clear advantage, but Iron Man is able to create an underwater avalanche and use a power drainer to get the upper hand. Only when he slaps a negator pack on Stingray, it has no effect, meaning none of Ray's tech is based on Iron Man tech. In response to the incident this creates, Tony Stark is forced to hold a press conference where he declares Iron Man to have gone rogue, and the billionaire is forced to fire his alter ego from Stark Enterprises. Speaking of fired, immediately after this, we get what I understand to be the first Marvel Comics appearance of the Big Orange himself, though I don't really see the resemblance. Oh, wait, there we go. Now I see it. The only way I even know who this is supposed to be is his line about being on the cover of People magazine, an event that would have literally just happened at about the same time this issue came out. Other celebrities here include Michael J. Fox making a stilted Back to the Future reference, Don Johnson with a Miami Vice call-out, and Hulk Hogan, who passed away literally while I was working on this video, which is super weird actually. All these celebrities are gathered together for an auction, but it has been crashed by the Beetle and Iron Man. As the Beetle wanted to steal the auction items, and Iron Man wanted to cross Beetle off his list of battlesuits stealing his technology. Since Iron Man is an Avenger level hero and Beetle is Beetle, the fight is over quickly. Another negator pack applied, and we move on to the next big thing, which in this case is Nick Fury himself bringing S.H.I.E.L.D. to meet with Tony Stark, as Fury wants to bring Iron Man down. Tony is unexpectedly cooperative, handing Fury a file on someone named Randall Pierce, who Stark claims is the person that he originally hired to be Iron Man. He even offers to help Fury track down and apprehend Pierce, claiming that he's doing so because he wants the Iron Man armor back, since he invented it. Of course, Pierce doesn't actually exist. This is all just a ruse for Tony to get close to the Mandroids, a group of agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that wear high-tech armor that Tony helped develop. This is the second time we've seen Iron Man handing them their own butts, the first time being back in the Kree-Skrull War, where Tony embarrassed them while wearing those ridiculous rocket skates. And really, if you lose to a guy in roller skates, you probably deserved to lose. Even though the Mandroids, despite their terrible name, are generally a force for good, their suits being based off of Tony's design still present too much of a threat that someone might copy his work, so he wants them shut down as well. So working with Fury, they devise a plan of attack at a location that Tony has supposedly tracked down as Randall Pierce's current hideout. Only it's of course a trap, laced with mines that fire negator packs at the Mandroids, shutting the first group of them down immediately. For the rest, he has to get a bit more up close and personal, but for all their power and training, they don't prove a threat to Iron Man, and before long, he's managed to shut them all down. Fury immediately suspects Tony of selling them out to Pierce, forcing Tony to plant a fake bug to convince Fury that Pierce had infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. all on his own, and fakes rage over S.H.I.E.L.D.'s lack of professionalism before storming out. With that done, Tony turns his attention to another, supposedly heroic group. This time, he plans to take on the guards at the Vault. The Vault is a supervillain prison, and in order to deal with criminals of that power level, the guards are outfitted with their own armored tech suits. Without these suits, it would be much more difficult for them to contain these criminals. But even knowing this, Tony can't live with the fact that their suits are still designed from his tech. Just the same as he couldn't allow the Mandroids to continue. And to get to the guards, he once again goes with an inside man ploy. In this case, he has Rhodey dress up hilariously as Electro. It's really quite something to have Rhodey in whiteface. I'm gonna leave that alone. And while cosplaying the villain, Rhodey gets captured and sent to the Vault, to a special cell that would only keep in Electro's unique metabolism. But since he's not Electro, Rhodey is able to simply walk right out of the cell. He then knocks out the non-armored guards in the building by filling the air vents with a sleeping gas, then creates a hole in the automated defenses so that Iron Man can get inside as well, before finally going about slapping negator packs on the unused guard suits, while Iron Man deals with the still active guards. The only problem is, the Captain is also here. At the same time that all of this has been going on in the Iron Man comics, in the Captain America comics, Steve Rogers had resigned his role as Captain America, while the Oversight Committee laying claim to the Captain America brand assigned the role to John Walker. But Steve wasn't about to go gently into that good night, and instead he donned an outfit similar to what would become the US agent outfit later, and started calling himself the Captain. He had gone to Tony to get a new shield made, but realizing Tony was up to something, had followed him here to the Vault. The two don't really get a chance to fight though, as in attempting to save a guard whose air supply is running out while he tried to avoid breathing the knockout gas, Tony is able to sucker punch Cap and use a negator pack on the last remaining armor. This bit of story will actually continue in the Captain America comics, with Cap discovering that this temporary breach allowed several of the inmates of the Vault to escape. Cap and his entourage were able to capture some of the villains, but a few, like Titania, got away. Cap will then show up to Tony at his home to return the shield, and the two will have an actual fight in that issue. Though even that concludes with Tony saying he's going to continue anyway, regardless of how Cap feels about it, and then flying away. But back to this story, Iron Man heads next to Russia, using a special stealth suit that he designed in an earlier issue, and some rocket boosters that let him save his energy from the flight over. Once in the USSR, he plans to confront Crimson Dynamo and the Titanium Man, two of Marvel's older super armored villains. Though I guess really this is the second Crimson Dynamo, who's a bit more of a hero type, but regardless, Tony plans on shutting him down, the same as he has everyone else so far. Tony finds the Titanium Man first in his hidden underground base, but his stealth suit armor proves to be no match for the Titanium Man's first-class armor. To make matters worse, Dynamo and his government masters had intended for the fight with Titanium Man to be an ambush, with Dynamo waiting just outside to destroy whoever emerged victorious. Instead, in attempting to escape, Iron Man runs across Dynamo and ends up making short work of him, slapping him with the Negator Pack before the commie bastard even knows what hit him. Titanium Man doesn't go down so easily though, managing to destroy Tony's next Negator Pack. And since Tony had attempted to go stealth for this mission, he only brought the 2 packs, leaving him with no way to shut down Titanium Man. Without other ideas, Tony simply attempts to escape, but with Titanium Man wrapping him in a bear hug, his only option for doing that is to fire his jet boots at maximum. This ends up heating Titanium Man's suit up to the point that it actually catches on fire, which is a really high temperature for titanium, destroying the armor and at least apparently killing the man inside. But while Tony's armor war so far had been controversial, taking it across borders and killing a citizen of the USSR in his own homeland has made it an international incident, and the consequences are really starting to build up. The first result is that the West Coast Avengers kick Iron Man off the team, which is why he won't appear in Vision Quest. But perhaps the bigger consequence is that the US military decides that Iron Man is now a threat that needs to be taken down, and they hire Edwin Cord to create firepower. Everything about this new suit is designed specifically to take down Iron Man, including the pilot, Jack Taggart, being specially trained for the task. And just to be extra sure, the military invites Tony Stark as a consultant to the trap that they've laid for Iron Man. Rhodey tries to talk Tony out of attacking, but since this suit, like all the others, was built based on his designs, he feels he's going to have to confront firepower one way or another. So he heads into the desert to do exactly that, and immediately discovers that the suit really lives up to its name. Nothing Iron Man has even phases firepower, and Taggart nearly kills Tony despite the protection of his armor. In desperation, Tony flees into the helicopter he and Rhodey arrived in, but the military is so ready to take out Iron Man that they're ready to blow up the helicopter, killing the 2 civilians that they believe are inside, just to bring an end to the former Avenger. So to save Rhodey, despite his terrible condition, Iron Man flies out of the helicopter again, only to be immediately targeted by Firepower's mini nuke and blasted to smithereens. The end. Except, of course, not really. The armor had been sent out as a decoy, empty except for some blood from packets they kept around in case of Tony finding himself in a medical emergency. But with Tony bruised and broken, his armor destroyed, and the military thinking him dead, he begins to consider the possibility of retiring as Iron Man forever. His work as the hero is basically done since he managed to shut down all the armors using his technology that he's aware of, save for firepower, and Mr. Zimmer, the computer guy from earlier, develops a computer virus that infects every computer on the planet and erases all blueprints and files related to Tony's tech, the same as the Negator Packs did to the physical hardware. So now, Tony just wants to get back on track and focus on his company. Marcy Pearson, the head of Stark's PR department, even suggests the company try to get a new spokesperson, and wonders if she should contact Bill Cosby's agent. Yeah. Definitely do not do that, Marcy. Especially not you. Yikes. But while Tony may be done with Iron Man, Edwin Cord isn't done with Tony Stark. He basically blackmails and bullies the army into letting him keep firepower for a while. And then Cord sends Taggart out to terrorize Stark Enterprise, attempting to force the company into bankruptcy, ruining Tony Stark's life the same way Edwin Cord thinks Stark ruined his life. Though if you've read enough comics, you're probably aware that Cord is definitely the one responsible for ruining his own life, but That's besides the point. When Tony realizes what's happening, he knows what he has to do, and he heads home to his private lab and begins designing a new suit. He locks himself away for weeks as he works, and the product of all of this is another new Iron Man suit, the Model 9, as opposed to the Model 7 Silver Centurion design that he'd been using for the rest of the story, or the Model 6 stealth suit we briefly saw in Russia, or the Model 8, which was an underwater armor that was barely actually worn. But it gets a number for some reason. This new model is stronger, sleeker, and faster than even the Firepower suit. It includes other upgrades like an energy shield, and his repulsor rays changed to pulse bolts. With the new model, Tony defeats Firepower as easily as Firepower had defeated the Model 7, though Jack, unwilling to admit defeat, still attempts to launch the mini nuke on his back. Only with the damage he's sustained, the nuke is stuck in its launcher and can't fire, despite still counting down to explode. Firepower admits what is happening to Iron Man, who spends several tense minutes attempting to hack Firepower's armor to stop the countdown, and with just seconds to spare, finally manages to shut down the missile. We don't see Tony use a negator pack, but this will be the last appearance of the Firepower armor regardless, at least to my knowledge, though Jack Taggart will return eventually. Tony returns home and decides that he might need to continue being Iron Man after all, and then takes a nap, cause he is tired. To sleep, and then perchance to dream, in art provided by guest writer and artist, the legendary Barry Windsor Smith. This epilogue story visualizes Tony's fears over the event, showing the deaths caused by his technology, and seeing himself turn into a monster created by that tech. His only escape is turning that power back on himself. When he wakes, he realizes that no matter what evils were committed using his technology in the past, he is simply going to have to keep moving forward. And we're going to have to move into the breakdown. Maybe it's the current political climate in 2025, or maybe it's just that I've never been much of an Iron Man fan, but oof, this story is not winning me over. A lot of the story not around the armor wars focuses on Stark's company failing, and it's just a little hard to feel sorry for a billionaire who is also lavishly throwing money away by doing things like apparently buying the entire town of Nome, Alaska, or buying out all of Disneyland for a day just to have a private lunch there. Like, yeah, I feel so sorry for you, obscenely rich guy. Your life is so hard. And Tony doesn't really come off as the hero to me in this story either. I get the power/responsibility thing of this being tech he designed in the hands of villains, but his refusal to let any other heroes help him or even to explain what's going on just makes it seem like he's going to unnecessary ends and making this harder and more dangerous for everyone than it really needs to be. And people die as a result that probably wouldn't have had to die if it wasn't for this whole dirty Harry attitude of his. The story also gets pretty repetitive. Tony shows up to a bad guy, they fight for like 1 or 2 pages, usually with Tony having a severe upper hand, and then he slaps a negator pack on them and leaves. Wash, rinse, repeat. For basically 7 issues, with one of those being double length. So 8 issues, kind of. Also, I get that everything at the time had to be called something wars, but like, come on. Secret Wars was at least a series of battles between good and evil fought on a distant planet and kept a secret from everyone on Earth, so, you know, the name made sense. This is Armor series of sucker punches to disable said armor. Yeah, I guess that doesn't have the same ring to it. I just feel this should have been a bigger showdown between these various groups. Instead, it feels a little like Demon in a Bottle, where the real villain was actually the alcoholism all along. But here the real villain is Tony's need to be right more than to do right. Only, it wasn't treated as the villain in this story. Instead, it's his motivation. But I'll admit, there are things I do like about this. Some of the means of getting to the confrontations do provide for some interesting story points, and it had to have been pretty cool at the time to see a lot of these characters show up in the same story for what had to be one of the first times ever. I also appreciate Michelini's attention to the side characters and side stories that continue outside of all the superhero stuff, especially the continued callbacks to Tony's struggle with alcoholism. Also, Windsor Smith's epilogue issue, while maybe a bit heavy-handed in its point and message, is perhaps the best thing to come out of this whole event and should not be ignored. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of medium. Definitely a strong and important story in the history of Iron Man, but I think enough of it is going to rub people the wrong way or fail to live up to other big events that it's hard to say it's for everyone. The collected edition gets 1. Model 7 helmet, which we're going with also being fairly middle of the road. The collection contains all 8 issues of the story, including that double-sized issue 225, and features an introduction from Michelini, though that introduction is mostly about pasta, so don't get too excited. There are definitely better collections out there, but at least it's an all-in-one nice, neat little package. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sure some of you are unhappy at me for disliking this story, but what can I say? I think it's going to take a lot more than this to sell me on Iron Man. Sorry. More Marvel events are on their way, and then we'll probably be headed back to some New 52, and if I can manage it, some DC Rebirth stuff. So if you did enjoy this video, or you're looking forward to any of that, or you're just all armored up with nowhere to go, then be sure to click the like and subscribe and all those YouTube things so you can help the channel out, and so you can help yourself to be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here, in the Comic Cave.